Hello, I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome to this week's World Have Your Say. And of course, all we're going to talk about is Rupert Murdoch. He brought the news of the world back in the 60s, and it was crucial as he built a vast media empire. And it still shifted more copies than any other British newspaper. But the phone hacking scandal has put an end to it. Meanwhile, today, David Cameron has said the relationship between the press and politicians needs to be reset. But are we beyond that, not just in the UK, but also where you live? Do you think the press is living up to your expectations? And what about the Murdoch empire itself? It'll operate in most of the countries where you're watching now. So despite this current crisis, does it bring information, entertainment and employment that should be welcomed? If you're tweeting as you watch us, do use the WHYS hashtag. Now, if you want to call us during the programme, we're live. The number to ring is country code 44 2070 83 72 72. And if you didn't jot that down, it's going to be on the screen throughout the show. And before we get talking about Mr. Murdoch and his various problems at the moment, let's have a look at the other news of the day. We're, of course, going to start in Florida. We're hoping that the space shuttle will take off for a final time in a few minutes. Let's cross straight to the BBC's Laura Trevelyan. Laura, some doubts about the weather. What's the latest?
Well, hundreds of thousands of people have gathered here along Florida's Space Coast. You can see them on the bridge behind me, just hoping that the final space shuttle is indeed going to take off in about 26 minutes' time. But the weather has been cloudy. We still don't know if the launch is going ahead. The astronauts are in there, strapped in and ready to go. And for the nearly 1 million people who have gathered, this is a bittersweet moment, celebrating America's success in space. But there's also concern about what's next for America's space programme.
Thanks, Laura. If it takes off on time, we'll have it here live on the BBC's World Have Your Say. And as you're watching, if you want to pass comment on the end of the Space Shuttle programme, as I said, use the WHYS hashtag. Now, let's catch up on some of the other news. Going back to the phone hacking scandal, the former editor of the News of the World, Andy Coulson, has been arrested today. He was communications advisor to Prime Minister David Cameron for 4 years after he worked at the paper, and the PM has said the decision to hire him was his alone. We're getting reports that a plane carrying 112 people crashed as it tried to land at Kisangani International Airport in DR Congo. A spokesman for the government says that 40 survivors have been pulled from the wreckage. In other news, we've reports from Syria that say several people have been killed during renewed anti-government demonstrations. Protesters have again taken to the streets in cities across the country, very much rejecting the government's offer of a national dialogue. There have also been protests in Egypt with a massive turnout in Cairo's Tahrir Square. Hundreds of thousands of people are demanding faster political reform and swift trials of former officials. Of course, as soon as we get news on whether the space shuttle will be taking off on time or not, we'll bring it to you here on World Have Your Say. In the meantime, let's talk about Rupert Murdoch and the various difficulties for him, primarily in the UK at the moment. Live with us from London, we have Wednesday Clarkson, former reporter on the Sunday Mirror tabloid in the UK and a veteran of several other newspapers as well. Live from Delhi, we have Vanita Kohli Kandekar, author of The Indian Media Business, and we're also hoping to get guests up from Texas and from Jamaica in the next couple of minutes. Vanita, let me start with you. Do you think that Rupert Murdoch's media empire serves India well?
You're not going to like this, but yes, I do think it serves India very well because he spent a long time investing in this market without any returns. I think it was 9 years before he saw or tasted success in this market. The most important thing that Rupert has done for this market, I think he showcased it to the world. Because when News Corp became successful in the broadcasting market in India, is when all the other guys, whether it was Turner, whether it was Disney, many of the other foreign broadcast companies, upped their ante in India. They started investing more money. And that's why he's been very good for this market. You must also remember that Rupert has very little investment in the news business in India. He owns 26% of a small news company, and that's about it. And he has no management control, active control, or editorial control over this company. So in that sense, the scandal that you're seeing in the UK, though there is a lot of talk about Murdoch and his businesses in India and how, his brands tend to dumb down content. Actually, if you look at it from a business and a content perspective, News Corp is a very well-run professional.
And what's interesting is that your comments refer to India right now. Wensley, you worked in the tabloids for many a year. Take us back 20, 25 years. Don't we have to acknowledge that Rupert Murdoch reinvigorated the British press?
Yeah, Rupert Murdoch was a great operator back then. I think the biggest question today is that we have three main characters in this saga. Rupert Murdoch, aged 80, his son in his mid to late 30s, and a woman who's Rebecca Brooks, who's never actually worked as an active journalist in the engine room of a newspaper.
And
of
Wensley,
those three people, Rupert Murdoch's the only one who's ever done anything.
Before you pass comments on them, I should mention Rebecca Brooks is scheduled to be meeting News International staff at the moment. As soon as we get news of what she's been saying, we'll let you know. Now, she is the CEO of News International. James Murdoch is the chair. You may not like the individuals involved, Wensley, but don't you have to acknowledge that fundamentally the British press is better for Rupert Murdoch?
Not now, it's not. 25 years ago, he was, as I just said, he was a great operator. I had a lot of time for him, but something happened to him about 20 years ago. He decided to promote his own children, and he brought through a woman with no real experience. He's now paying the price.
And Vanita, do you not have any concerns that his loyalty to his family, and who says he shouldn't have loyalty to his family, but loyalty to his family is beginning to impair his judgment?
I don't know about Lachlan and Elizabeth, but James was the head of the India business 10 years back, and that was his first major assignment in News Corp. I don't know if you know that. And he's come back again as head of the Europe and Asia business. And in his first assignment, it was James, along with the local Indian CEO, Peter Mukherjee, who actually turned News Corp's India operations around. That's when News Corp India hit big time. So from whatever I've seen of James' performance, he seems to have some of his dad's genes. But whether or not the family influence is good or not, you must remember that worldwide, media is a family-owned business. There are very few large, professionally run media companies in the world.
That's an interesting. Wesley's saying maybe that's the problem.
Yeah.
Those of you watching, do you accept that media moguls are likely to involve their family in how they run their empires, or do you think it should be driven by business decisions alone, nothing to do with family? By all means, tweet us using WHYS. If you'd like to join the conversation on Facebook, go to facebook.com/World Have Your Say. Now, we've been talking about this all week on BBC World Service Radio on World Have Your Say. And during yesterday's programme, Ignacio tweeted us from Texas, and we can speak to him live now over the internet. Ignacio, give us your take on Rupert Murdoch and his role in America.
Well, his biggest role, I believe, is related to Fox News. Very conservative, political, really organization that pretends to provide news to this country.
You criticise Fox News, you say it's far right or to the right of centre, but the same question I put to Wensley, wouldn't you admit that Fox News has reinvigorated the way that news is covered on the television in America?
No, not at all. I think that they are responsible for the loss, really, of civility in political dialogue. I don't think, I understand that there needs to be a balance, but there is no balance there.
Now, I'm interested in that word civility, and as you were saying that, I can see calls are coming in from the Philippines, India, South Africa. If you want to call us up, it's country code 44 2070 83 72 72. Wensley, that's an interesting word, civility. Has Rupert Murdoch reduced the amount of civility in media around the world?
You know what, in fairness to Rupert Murdoch, it's not just his newspaper organisation. We've all been guilty of lots of things. However, let's get this into perspective now. What has really brought about the end of the News of the World was the telephone hacking of the victim of a murder. You know, a normal, ordinary person. That was outrageous. I would never have even thought of doing it when I was a journalist. So something's gone wrong. The pressure that Murdoch's editors were bringing upon their staff is what caused this. And that's what we have to look at. You know, let's forget about PR. Let's put all that aside. Let's look at the human beings involved in this and the people who appear to be the victims, because that tells us what's gone wrong. But that tells us how far it's gone.
I suppose what I'm wondering, and though some of you watching on BBC World News can help me out here, is the pressure that Rupert Murdoch puts on his editors to get results any different to the pressure that all proprietors put on their editors, the people who run their newspapers, the people who send up or down their circulation? I'm curious to get your response to that. The email's worldhaveyoursay@bbc.com. Let's pull up a message from Andrew in Ghana. He's got in touch through our Facebook page. He says, Rupert has championed the commercial side of journalism. I think Murdoch has done good. He's provided jobs and helped government revenue by paying tax. He's just like any businessman. Well, we can pick up on those points with a gentleman called Jess Toldfeld, who's joining us live from New York. Because, Jess, you worked for Fox News for 13 years. You now run your own media training company in New York. Do you think that by embracing commercialism, by embracing profit, Rupert Murdoch actually helped journalism?
Yeah, I think he did. I mean, obviously, he kept me employed for a number of years and many other people. Do I think he helped journalism? Oh, journalism is a word we could spend the next hour talking about. I think that there's an issue, certainly in this country, where there's a little bit less journalism going on across the board than there should be. I certainly don't think that reporters are out there doing what we're hearing about here in the UK. And I'd also like to throw in, that never occurred to me when I was a producer. To me, that's equivalent to breaking into somebody's home. But back to your original question, yeah, I think he's had a great impact here on the voice of news.
But here's a question for all of you, Vanita, Wensley, and Jed. The point here is that some would say Rupert Murdoch was just as concerned with achieving political goals via the media which he owns as he was about telling the truth. And that in the end, that's what's led to a breakdown in the relationship between the media and politicians, because Rupert Murdoch wanted to be political as well as to report. And some would suggest those two don't go together. Wensley, what's your view?
Politicians themselves are ducking the issue. They should take just as much responsibility for what's happening, because they've allowed Murdoch to continue building his power within many countries across the globe. And I think that's very important, because at the moment here in the UK, a lot of politicians are enjoying, in quotes, the suffering of Murdoch, but they themselves have helped Murdoch through. I know that newspapers were the ones that turned over and exposed the politicians for their expenses scandal here in the UK, and now in a way you feel as if the politicians are getting their own back, but they've got to take responsibility for what's happening as well. Rebecca Brooks, who's the former editor of the News of the World that everybody's looking at the moment, she has made a full-time profession of getting on with 2 Labour Prime Ministers and a Tory Prime Minister.
Jess, come in.
You want me to comment on that?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I mean, my main comment is that basically we need to focus on, is this a problem that is widespread, or is this a problem that was happening at one organization?
No, but Jess, let's talk about journalists trying to make political points, make friends with politicians to promote their agenda. Some are suggesting Rupert Murdoch pioneered that kind of journalism, and it's broken down the core role that journalists were supposed to perform in any civilized society.
I'm sure he's not the first person or the pioneer. I'm sure he's not the pioneer. I'm sure he's happened to be called a pioneer in many circles, but this has been going on longer than he's been alive. And he's not the only organization trying to cozy up to politicians. I know plenty of news channels and news organizations, broadcast organizations here in the United States are always trying to elbow up to politicians because they want the big interview. They want the chance when something breaks to be talking to them and have control.
I think the irony is that newspapers themselves are in decline, which means that in effect, the power of the newspapers will decline with that as they turn into electronic media, and we won't have a newspaper anymore to look at. Now, the problem with that is it will then water down the power of the newspapers, which in a way is good, in a way is bad, but also the people that will be running these electronic versions of newspapers are going to have even less training as journalists than we have at the moment.
Well, that is
it's going to be a nightmare scenario.
You say it's a nightmare scenario. Some people online are very excited that perhaps Twitter, Facebook, blogs and so on may start fulfilling the role that they once looked to print journalists to perform. I can see calls from you coming in from Malaysia, Qatar, Nigeria, Portugal, Jamaica, Mauritius. Let's just pull up a comment from Zach Goldsmith, a Conservative MP in the UK. He told the Guardian newspaper, Rupert Murdoch is clearly a very, very talented businessman. He's possibly even a genius, but his organisation has grown too powerful and has abused that power. I can see Wensley nodding his head. I wonder if those of you watching on BBC World News are nodding your head too. Do get in touch through worldhaveyoursay.com. We're going to pause for a couple of minutes and then we'll carry on the conversation. The BBC's World Have Your Say is a place where people come together to talk about the issues, events and experiences that matter most to them. It's live on BBC Radio, online, and now every Friday it's here on BBC World News. And while we may provide the platform, the issues that we discuss are the ones that you're already talking about. This isn't about us interviewing you, it's about you talking to people around the world.
A lot of the power of the programme comes from, say, a taxi driver in Moscow being able to talk to a farmer in Uganda about the same subject. We've taken the programme around the world to many different places. South Africa during the World Cup, we were in Beijing during the Olympics, and we were in Haiti immediately after the earthquake.
Foreign aides need to know that there has always been corruption in this country. Yeah. Make sure everything is distributed the right way.
Right people.
I'm hoping that World Have Your Say on the TV will recreate the atmosphere of the radio and the online site, a gathering together of people around the world to talk in a civilised atmosphere and share ideas and experiences.
These guys are our brothers and sisters, and they have nowhere to go. They have made mistakes along the line in the past. We just have to forgive them.
We want to make World Have Your Say as accessible as we possibly can, so we're not short of contact details. You can phone us up now. The number's country code 44 2070 83 72 72. Of course, we're on Facebook and Twitter as well. Our email is worldhaveyoursay@bbc.com, or you can text us from anywhere on country code 44 7786 20 60 80. And we know that some of those contact details aren't the snappiest, but don't worry, they're all at worldhaveyoursay.com. We're looking forward to hearing from you. Hello, I'm Ross Atkins. Thank you very much indeed for joining me on World Have Your Say. We're live on BBC World News. And of course, the biggest story of the week has been this phone hacking scandal, which has claimed the news of the world. A paper which was 168 years old, but come Sunday, its time will come to an end. And we're discussing any number of issues surrounding Rupert Murdoch and his media empire. Let's quickly put a point to Jess in New York and also to Wensley in London. And the point is this: should we now try and regulate the influence that Rupert Murdoch and others have? Wensley, do you think that's the answer?
No, it's too late anyway. As I said earlier, newspapers are in decline. They're going to disappear pretty quickly. It's going to make no difference whatsoever.
You say it can't work. Jess, a quick comment from you before we go to the space shuttle.
Regulating the press sounds like government controls and watching over. I think it would be too unwieldy.
All right, thank you very much for those comments. And as I was saying at the top of the programme, we're building up to the final takeoff of the Space Shuttle programme, which began in 1981. As you're watching, if you want to tweet us, do use the WHYS hashtag. But let's cross to Florida and the BBC's Palab Ghosh.
The good news is that we are now go for launch. You can see behind me the countdown clock has begun. 7 minutes and 35 seconds before Atlantis sets off on its final mission. With me to talk through this historic moment is former NASA astronaut Piers Sellers, You've been on a few of these shuttle missions. What's going on now that the countdown clock has started?
Well, the tempo's really picked up. I think a lot of people were thinking earlier today that we wouldn't go. We were just marking time.
Including you.
Yeah, including me. Good job I didn't put money on it. So we're out of the 9-minute hold now, and the crew are taking the last actions to prepare the shuttle for launch.
So what things will they be doing?
First of all, they're going on to internal electricity. So they're using stores inside the shuttle to generate electricity. And very soon they'll be cranking up the auxiliary power units. Those are the pumps that control the nozzle deflections during ascent.
How must they be feeling? Nervous or ice cool as astronauts
I think they're
are?
excited, I think they're joyful, and I think they're paying attention to business.
And so what can we expect over the next few minutes?
Well, they're going to start the APUs, these big pumps, in about 1.5 minutes, and then you'll see the nozzles of the shuttle swinging in different directions to test all those systems. And you can feel that when you're in the cockpit. You can feel the whole orbiter moving around. It's the first indication that you're really going to go somewhere.
And so what's the time frame now?
Well, we've got 6 minutes to go. And we're going to fire up these APUs any minute now, and then do some computer configuration, close your visors, and turn on the oxygen. Those are the last things to do.
And then it'll be countdown and launch into orbit. What's
That's
that
right.
like?
Well, the last few seconds are exciting. 10 seconds before launch, all the computers come alive, the navigation system says, here I am, and I'm ready to launch.
Well, I've got butterflies in my stomach. I'm feeling exciting. How about you?
It's good. I always feel more nervous watching someone else launch.
Ice cool yourself.
I prefer to be in there myself. Yeah.
Well, Piers, for the moment, thank you very much. We will come back to you for the final countdown. But just for now, we're crossing to my colleague, Laura Trevelyan, who are with the crowds in Titusville, not far away. Laura.
Well, and Palab, the excitement here is mounting as that countdown proceeds. And one of the many hundreds of thousands here along the Florida coast is Mara Factor. Mara, space has always played a big role in your life, hasn't it?
It has. I'm a child of the space age. One of my earliest memories was watching the first moon landing with my family.
Now, you're about to watch the final shuttle launch down, if indeed it does happen. What are your emotions at this moment?
Oh, I'm so sorry that it's ending as a shuttle program. I know more space flight will continue, but the shuttle is special.
And do you worry that America is losing its leading role in space to other developing nations like India and China?
No, we're in such a global situation these days. It's just part of the globalization, and I think we all can play a role in it.
Now, President Kennedy talked about space as the new ocean that America should sail on and be second to none. Do you still feel that that sense of patriotism is there about America's space program?
I think it's changed because I think a lot more people are more aware of other parts of the world and that we're not just one island in the middle of the globe. We are part of everything else, and so are the other countries.
And Mara, do you still hope that America can put a man on Mars?
Oh, sure, I can always hope. I think it'll take a major leap in technology, and I hope that we continue to push for that leap.
Mara Factor, thank you very much indeed. So that's us here with the crowds as that countdown proceeds.
Laura, thank you very much. I don't know who's more excited, you and the crowds over there, or the journalists gathered here. You can see that the countdown clock is past the 4-minute mark, and with me is still Piers Sellers. Piers, what's happening now?
Right now, they're just about to move all the rocket nozzles to test they go to their full travel. So in about 10 seconds, they'll start swinging.
Swinging?
Left, right, backwards, forwards. And they're so heavy that the whole stack moves, and you can feel it when you're sitting there.
Of course, as well as being an exciting moment, it's a very tense moment because this is a dangerous vehicle. It's a dangerous launch. Bad things have happened in the past.
Well, now that you bring that up, yeah, if anyone tries to tell you that this is a safe and comfortable business, it's not. They'd be lying to you. It has its dangers, but I think a lot of work has been done today to make this probably the safest launch ever. I'm hoping so.
And so when it does launch, what should viewers look out for?
What you'll see is, first of all, the main engine's light, so you'll see smoke coming out one side of the pad. Then when the solid's light, you'll see a huge cloud coming out the other side of the pad. Then off she goes. And then you'll see the whole stack twist about a few seconds after clearing the tower. It'll twist onto its back and head uphill.
And how does it feel like when you're inside, as you've been 3 times?
Vibrated, a lot of vibration, a ton of noise, you're bouncing around in your straps, everything in the cockpit is shaking, and you can feel yourself going fast.
And do you have work to do? Are you still enjoying the ride?
ready to do. Instruments to watch, the health and safety of the vehicle.
And then the solid rocket boosters fall away. That's a critical moment, isn't it?
It is. Everything actually gets much safer after that. The first stage, the first 2 minutes, is the most dangerous. It really is.
And then after that, what happens?
It's about a 6.5 minute push on the main engines, the liquid-fueled engines, up to orbit. And at the end of that, you're doing 5 miles a second out of the atmosphere and headed towards orbit.
5 miles a second. Here's, for the moment, we'll come back to you after launch. Fingers are firmly crossed for a safe launch. It seems like we are going to launch. Now, let's go over to NASA for the commentary.
For ET LH2 pressurization.
Solid rocket booster camera is being activated. T-minus
30 seconds.
Sound suppression water system is being armed. T-minus 1 minute. But oxygen and liquid hydrogen fill and drain valves are closed. T-minus 40 seconds, handing off to Atlantis' computers at T-minus 31. T-minus 35, 33.
Clock will hold at T-minus 31 seconds due to a failure.
And we have had a failure. Granulate sequencer.
We had a problem on the Gox retract switches. NNTDSP. Go ahead. Yes, sir. We need guys to go do the verification per the LCC, please. All right, CMAC?
Yes, CMAC. The LCC says we need to verify using a camera, and we're positioning camera 62 right now.
Okay, let us know as soon as 62 is swung over and you can verify LCC for GVA retract, please. And all personnel, we're holding here at 31 seconds while we get a verification that the GVA has fully retracted for our pre-plan.
This is CMAC. We verify retracted.
Okay, and you can verify that it is fully retracted per the instructions that we developed, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and SPE? And NTD, SPE concurs. They satisfy the requirements of GSE 13 pre-plan contingency. I'm go. Okay, I copy. And launch director. Yes, sir. I heard all that. Concur. Press on. All right, very good. NTD, SPE. Yes, sir.
So it seems that there's been a last-minute fault. The countdown has stopped at 31 seconds. Piers Sellers, can you tell us what the problem is?
Not sure exactly. I had a problem with the ground launch sequencer, and so it held automatically at 31 seconds. And they're discussing what to do next.
They haven't got much time to fix the problem.
The window is slipping by, and I think we'll be almost out of it in a minute or so.
So how long have they got to fix the problem? Just a minute?
Just a minute at most, I think.
And what happens if we miss the window?
Then you have to safe the whole vehicle and make everything quiet again in the vehicle and get the crew out and reset for another attempt another day.
It's an anticlimax for us, but what's it going to be for the crew? What will the crew be doing?
The crew will be a bit frustrated, I would imagine, but they'll be getting on with the business now of helping save the vehicle. So they'll be moving to a checklist and going through some procedures right now.
Oh, it's starting again. The clock has restarted. So now back to NASA.
Solid rocket booster nozzle steering check and work.
20.
Firing chain is armed.
15.
Go for main engine start. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. All three engines up and burning. 2, 1, 0, and liftoff, the final liftoff of Atlantis on the shoulders of the space shuttle. America will continue the dream.
Program, Houston.
Roger, roll, Atlantis. Houston now controlling the flight of Atlantis. The space shuttle spreads its wings one final time for the start of a sentimental journey into history. 24 seconds into the flight, roll program complete. Atlantis now heads down, wings level on the proper alignment for its 8.5-minute ride to orbit. 4.5 million pounds of hardware and humans taking aim on the International Space Station. 40 seconds into the flight, the 3 liquid fuel main engines throttling back to 72% of rated performance in the bucket, reducing stress on the shuttle as it goes transonic for the final time. Engines now revving up, standing by for the throttle up call. Atlantis, go at throttle up, no action, DPDT.
Go at throttle up, no action on DPDT.
That call from Capcom Barry Wilmore, a transducer, instrumentation only, no action required. Atlantis now 15 miles in altitude, already 16 miles downrange from the Kennedy Space Center, 1 minute 40 seconds into the flight. Atlantis flexing its muscles one final time. Atlantis traveling almost 2,600 miles an hour, 21 miles in altitude, 24 miles downrange, standing by for solid rocket booster separation. Booster officer confirms staging a good solid rocket booster separation. Guidance now converging. The main engine steering the shuttle on a pinpoint path to its preliminary orbit. 2 minutes, 20 seconds into the flight. Atlantis already traveling 3,200 miles an hour, 35 miles in altitude, 50 miles downrange. The propulsion officer reports the orbital maneuvering system engines have ignited. Atlantis kicking on its afterburners for 1 minute, 23 seconds for the final phase of powered flight. Atlantis, 2-engine TOW.
Well, the shuttle's successfully gone off into space. The critical stage is over. The solid rocket boosters have separated. And more exciting, look at that giant plume Atlantis has left in its trail. What do they say at the end, Piers? The dream continues. There is a lot of hope at this moment in time. It's not the end, it's the beginning.
And solid rocket boosters are gone. So we're in a much better shape now for the last push into orbit. And the crew will be being mashed back in their seats now pretty hard.
And of course the astronauts have got a 12-day mission ahead of them, but they can't divorce themselves from the fact that they're as much part of space history as John Glenn, Neil Armstrong and all that. They're part of the last shuttle crew. How must they be feeling?
I think enormous pride right now, but also they've got a few more minutes of ascent to deal with, so all eyes in the cockpit, I would imagine, right now. And they've already had one little false alarm on the way up.
And how about you, Piers? You've lived the dream. You've wanted to be an astronaut ever since you saw Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon. Do you think that this is the beginning of the end or the beginning of something?
Oh, it's not the beginning of the end. It's the beginning of a pause,
however,
I would imagine. I think in a few years you'll see NASA coming back hard for something new.
And so we're seeing live pictures of the shuttle now. So what exactly is happening?
This is a picture from the belly of the external tank. So you're seeing on top of the shuttle and below the external tank. And there's the curve of the Earth. They're still upside down. In a couple of minutes, the whole thing will roll right side up. So you'll see that picture twist in the view.
And so what will the commander be doing at the moment, the pilot? They're the guys in charge at the moment.
That's exactly right. They're monitoring all the instruments, making sure that all the abort thresholds are passing safely. They're very happy right now that everything's looking very good, and they're driving up to orbit.
Coming up on the 5-minute mark.
And so what's next? It's safety checks, safety first.
That's right. We've got about 3 more minutes of powered flight yet before main engine cutoff, or MECO. So they're looking hard at the instruments, and the G-force is building up on them quite strongly now. It'll build up to a peak of 3 Gs. They'll be mashing them back in their seats.
And after that point, they unhook their seat
Well,
belts.
when the main engine's cut off, you go from being 3 Gs, being pushed your seat, to no Gs, floating around, and all the pencils and stuff float around the cabin. So, and it stays like that for the next 2 weeks.
And the Shuttle's a unique vessel. Atlantis is particularly unique. Was it your favourite?
Oh, by far and away, my favourite.
Because all the Shuttles are different, aren't they?
They all look a little bit different. Atlantis is sort of pretty banged around, but you know, she actually launches on time more than the other ones. So she did today.
Okay, Piers Ellis, thank you very much. And now, let's cross over to my colleague Laura Trevelyan. Laura, how exciting was it for you in Titusville?
Well, the crowd here went wild. And joining me now to discuss this are Cordell Prater and also Gary Jones, who came here from Atlanta. They slept on chairs overnight to witness this. Cordell, what did you make of that?
It was a fantastic launch. It was better than the last one. So we were glad to be here. We couldn't miss the last one.
Right, and Gary, what did you think? I mean, extraordinary, wasn't it?
Absolutely extraordinary. My 3rd launch, and it never ceases to amaze me. The anticipation only exceeded by the launch itself. It was fantastic.
But Cordell, what are your reflections now? I mean, this is the end of the space shuttle. This is the final mission. Atlantis is taking those supplies to the International Space Station, but then what next for America in space?
Right. Well, it's not clear what's next for manned space flight. Of course, NASA has other missions that they do all the time. But I'm sure we'll have a manned space program again someday. We'll just have a little bit of a pause.
And Gary, what do you think that the space shuttle has really achieved in its 30 years?
Oh, what hasn't it achieved? The achievements in medicine, for one, that serves mankind worldwide. What they accomplished just in that arena, not to speak of the electronics and everything else. So it was, you can get down to the micro level if you want to look at that, but the space program itself was a success, and the shuttle was a tremendous success.
There we go. Quite an exciting time in Florida, to put it mildly. As the man on the voiceover said, America will continue the dream. Now, we're going to carry on the conversation here on World WHYS. We're talking about Rupert Murdoch and the various problems he's got with his empire in a couple of minutes' time. Just before we take the break, remember, you can call us up. We're always live here on BBC World News. The number is country code 44 2070 83 72 72. Or if you'd rather email us, worldwhys@bbc.com. Put your phone number with your comment, and one of the team will get back to you. We're discussing any element that you particularly would like to pick up on about this incredible phone hacking scandal which has claimed the news of the world in the UK. We'll get to that in a couple of minutes' time. Clemros Atkins, thank you very much indeed for joining me here on World Have Your Say. If you're tweeting, do use the WHYS hashtag. If you'd like to get in touch through Facebook, facebook.com/World Have Your Say. And we're talking about Rupert Murdoch. And of course, all of the attention is on what's happening in London, where News International is based, where the news of the world was published. But that's not where Rupert Murdoch is. He's in Idaho at a major conference. So before we go back to Wensley, a veteran of British tabloids, Vanita, now working in the Indian media industry, let's speak to David Gellis. He's a Financial Times journalist, and he's attending this conference in Idaho. David, first of all, tell us, what is this event?
This is the Allen & Company Media and Technology Conference. It happens every year this week in Sun Valley, Idaho, an idyllic ski resort up here in the Sawtooth Mountains. And it brings together some of the biggest names from media and technology, entertainment, and even politics. So along with Mr. Murdoch here are Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Eric Schmidt, including politicians such as Governor Chris Christie of New Jersey, a potential presidential candidate in coming years.
So a serious lineup, and I'm guessing they weren't expecting quite this level of attention.
Certainly not. In years past, the news that's come out of this conference has been maybe the odd deal, maybe a statement about Google's presence in China. This news has really dominated the week, though.
And it's ironic, isn't it, that while we're talking about the news of the world closing, presumably Rupert Murdoch is there to do deals to expand his media empire.
Well, it's never really clear what deals get done here. In years past, for example, in 1996, the ABC-Disney deal was hatched here, but it actually didn't come to fruition for months later. In 2009, the Comcast-NBCU deal, again, was hatched here, but it was months before the deal came to completion. So oftentimes, while these guys are talking behind the scenes, wheeling and dealing, it really does take months before we know the real end result of what happens here.
Well, we appreciate you bringing us up to date, Dave. And as you're speaking, we can see those pictures taken yesterday of Rupert Murdoch at that conference. When asked to comment, he said he didn't want to talk about it. Now, Wesley is still with us. Wesley Clarkson, a veteran of various British tabloids. We also have Vanita Kohli-Vandekar, an Indian media specialist. And we're going to speak to Joanna Malloy, columnist with the New York Daily News, in a moment. But first of all, let's pull up this message which has come into the BBC's news website from the crooner, saying we should not allow Murdoch to have any more control of our media, and I think he means the UK media. They've brought a British institution to closure. And I just wonder, Vanita, do you have any concerns about how much control Rupert Murdoch might have in the future in India?
It is a real concern in India. I may not share it, but the government does have concerns about it, which is why I don't know if you know this, but he owned a news channel 100% before the law changed to bring it down to 26% for foreign companies. So there is concern. There was a DTH, what you call satellite television license pending for almost 5 years before they got permission to launch a satellite TV service in India. So Rupert Murdoch always gets regulators' hackles up in India. But so far, I think they've kept their nose clean on that front. The only thing which I would sort of fault them for is excessive aggression at times, especially when talking. And I think in India and China, that's the thing which upsets people.
But it's interesting that you say that the regulators have got him under control, according to what you're saying. Joanna, welcome to our discussion. What's your view of this? Does Rupert Murdoch and indeed any other media mogul need to be controlled, stopped from owning too much?
Well, when I worked for Rupert at the New York Post at page 6, it was very clear to us that he did not like Ted Kennedy because Ted Kennedy passed a law where a mogul was not allowed to own a TV station and a newspaper in the same city. And we were given to understand that any time we got a picture of Ted Kennedy on his boat looking like a whale, printed, you know, anytime he's fooling around in the bars, that's a very big story.
All right.
And I was low down on the food chain, but you know, I knew where that was coming from.
And I can hear Wensley laughing. I'm curious, you've both worked for Rupert Murdoch at times. What's he like as a boss, Wensley?
He's the only one of the three people involved in all this who's actually capable of working as a journalist, in my opinion. He's actually a brilliant journalist. But unfortunately, his experience of journalism goes back a long way. And now he's an 80-year-old man with a massive empire, which is frankly out of control.
But Wensley, what was he like when you were working? Were you aware of him as a presence? Did he influence the work you and your editors did?
I didn't work directly for him, but all the people I know who've worked with him, and it used to be with him many years ago, said he was absolutely brilliant. However, he stepped back from that hands-on part of his experience, or the way he operated, many years ago. And this is, I think, one of the biggest problems he's got. He had to step back. His children have taken his place, other people who aren't very experienced, and now he's paying the price.
Joanna, what about you? Tell us some of your experiences.
Well, I know that when he was hands-on, there was an editor that printed the wrong lottery number, and so 1,000 people won the lotto, you know, Wingo, I think it was called. And that editor was made to wear a dunce cap all day. He is not, Wensley is exactly correct. He's not as hands-on now. He's great at delegating. It's part of his business genius. But I think he only owns in New York the New York Post for the political power.
Can I say something? sorry to butt in, but I just want to say something very important. I read today in the papers, what none of us are considering is that Rupert Murdoch and James Murdoch themselves are in danger of losing their jobs. Let's just get this straight. If this thing continues to snowball, their positions will be in danger as well because of the structure of the company that they front.
All right, let's just pause with the three of you and bring in Mega, who's with the World Have Your Say team on our news desk where all of your calls are being taken. Mega, where are we hearing from?
Well, firstly, we've been hearing a lot of comments about the shuttle launch. Nang Hatia posted on our Facebook page, "I'm excited to see this at last, although I haven't seen anything to convince me of the positive impact of all this." There's a great geographical spread for our callers for the main part of our show, which is the Murdoch Empire. Portugal, Niger, Philippines, India, South Africa. I've just spoken to Seren from Australia. The main themes include competition. For example, Eric in North Korea called to say that it leads to sensationalism. Also, what might be called cronyism. Angela posted on our Facebook page, how can the police investigate this when it's clear that they're not only corrupt, but also incompetent? And on Twitter, one theme is the lack of surprise. Martin says, I fully understand the outrage, but it's what tabloids do. He used the hashtag WHYS, which is on your screen. Feel free to do the same.
Thanks very much, Mega. I'm interested, just before we go to Wahida in Kenya, that issue of competition. Joanna, you work for the New York Daily News. You go right up against the New York Post. It's your big rival. But does it drive you on? Does the competition of having it there make you and your colleagues better journalists?
Well, I do have my video spy pen, but that is as far as I've gone. I wouldn't even know how to hack into somebody's phone, and I wouldn't want to do that. In fact, the investigative journalists that we have, their job is very tedious. They have to go through stacks of records, and that's what I worry about, is what will happen to the little guy who is being messed over by corruption or corporations dumping pollutants into the sea, and you know, where will the real journalists be? And I think maybe in the future, if newspapers die because of things like this, maybe non-profits will do investigative reporting.
Well, we're seeing lots of philanthropists putting money into journalism now in the States. But you say, where are the journalists coming from? Let's bring in Wahida. She's a journalism student in Nairobi. Wahida, are you confident that you and the students you work with can be top-rate journalists, people who deliver the kind of information we all want?
Could you please repeat yourself?
Can journalists, are you confident you can be as good a journalist as previous generations?
Yes, I am. I think I have it in me, so yes, I am.
All right, thank you very much indeed. I'm just curious, Joanna, where do I get one of these pens with the cameras in? They sound great.
She's got it switched on now.
She's got it on now.
Don't do
And Wesley, do you remain confident? Clearly journalism is changing, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's getting worse.
Well, it couldn't get much worse after what we've seen recently.
Well, I know,
UK.
but that's not representative of all journalists.
No, but I mean in terms of that. I think the point I made earlier may have some relevancy to this, is that newspapers themselves won't exist for much longer. And most of the e-version or internet versions of the newspapers we have today will be manned by just about anyone. I think citizen newspapers are going to take over the world.
And if you're near radio Wednesday, tune in to World Have Your Say on BBC Radio in an hour's time, because we're going to be talking about just that, whether journalists as we know them are going to be replaced by efforts of all of us online, and whether that is something to welcome. Well, thank you very much to Wesley, to Vanita and to Joanna. We're going to wrap up our conversation a little early because it's now 25 days since our colleague Arunboy Usmanov was arrested in Tajikistan, and he's accused of associating with Islamists, something that he and the BBC arrives. It's also worth noting he's got a heart condition and has diabetes as well. Well, let's read you a couple of the comments that have come into the BBC. Merla in the Philippines says on Facebook, may he never lose hope and faith, and our prayers will touch the hearts of people responsible for his suffering. There is always a new day after tomorrow. And we certainly wish Arunboy well. We'll keep on reading messages for him on World Have Your Say, on television and radio until he's released. Thank you very much for your company today. We'll carry on the conversation at bbcworldservice.com. I'll speak to you very soon. Goodbye.